an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Vorkosigan Saga Book 2-ish, Barrayar, Chapters 4, 5, and 6. In these chapters, I don't even know where to start on this. We've got people out here trying to freak out Cordelia by telling her husband is, gasp, bisexual. We find out the extent of the damage done in hiding memories. There is so much going on here, you guys. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Sofia for commissioning this episode. Sofia, if you are out there, thank you. Appreciate you. Yeah, these chapters are so packed with such a variety of things, both about personal life, about everybody's behavior about things. It's really funny how sort of puritanical the vibe is on Barrayar and how Cordelia doesn't get it at all. So let's just start at the beginning. So chapter 4, one aspect of her new life as a regent consort that Cordelia found easier to deal with than she'd anticipated was the influx of personal guards into their home. Her experience in the Baton Survey and Vorkosigans in the Barrayaran military service had given them both practice with life in close quarters. It didn't take Cordelia long to start to know the persons in uniforms and take them on their own terms. I never really actually stopped to consider what it would be like to live in these sorts of conditions without, you read all the time in fantasy, in even fiction set in the present, people who live or work in the kinds of conditions where there are guards and servants around all the time. But either they're working in those conditions and when they get home, they get away from it. Or almost always they live in those conditions and have their entire lives and don't really know what life is like without people being present all the time. But I never stopped to think about what it would be like if you hadn't lived like this and then suddenly that was what your life became. I think the only time I've ever really considered the kind of adjustment that would be was when I think about the President of the United States and his family and how everything becomes a project where somebody has to come with you now, and there are bodyguards and Secret Service and it's like a fucking production. And that's really been the only time I've considered it. And so I appreciate it being pointed out that she has worked with the military before though. And so this sort of thing, even though it is different with it just being her everyday life, she is still sort of prepared. Because I really, guys, I feel like I would hate this. This is the sort of thing where it's it could go either way. On the one hand, I don't like the concept of being observed all the time, but I also always feel like I'm observed anyway. So part of me is sort of well, what difference does it make? And then another part of me, I am somebody who I'll just laze around in my pajamas for far too long. And I would not want to do that when there are people around. I would feel like I need to get dressed and make myself presentable, which I don't like feeling that pressure, but I think it would be good for me because I don't think lazing around in my pajamas is the best thing for my mental health, So anyway, I don't know where I land on this, but I will say that having servants to do a bunch of stuff sounds amazing. I would love to just be able to be hey, can you pick this up for me from Walmart? And I don't have to go do it. And they just do it. Oh, just things like that. I hate errands, guys. They're so boring. So Cordelia is attending this combat tournament. And Drou isn't part of it. And Cordelia's like, well, why not? Like, the whole point of this is to keep everybody in practice, and you're guarding me, which does seem like you should be in practice, right? And she tells Drou, because Drou is like, well, I wasn't invited. And Cordelia, in her flippant sort of style, is just like, oh, well, then somebody fucked up. Go change. I'll do it. And it's like just not even a question. I love her when she gets like this. And when Drou is like, I don't think they'll like it, she's like, well, they can argue with Errol. I'm sure they'll really want to do that and enjoy it a lot. It's pretty funny. So Errol is like, all right, well, I mean, brace yourself, I guess. Like, I think this is probably a good idea, but it will be a bit of a change that they will need to get used to, and you probably won't like the way they behave about it at first. And he mentions that, like, she's taller, but she's also, like, significantly lower in weight than a lot of these guys, which might factor into how she does. I love this bit. He climbed to his feet and went to enter Drushnikovi and Kudelka's list. Cordelia could not hear what they said to each other across the garden, but supplied her own dialogue from gesture and expression, murmuring, Errol, Cordelia wants Drou to play. Kou, aw, who wants girls? Errol, tough. Kou, they mess everything up, and besides, they cry a lot. Sergeant Borthari will squash her. And then she's like, I hope that's what that gesture means. Otherwise, you're getting obscene, Kou. Errol, the little woman insists. You know how henpecked I am. Kou, oh, all right, phooey. This was delightful. Oh, God, this really got to me. So, of course, Rokosugin's father is just kind of like, okay, so what is this? A woman? This is not military. I don't like it. And Cordelia's like, military is whatever wins the war, I should think. Which, considering that they came out on top and she was part of the military, I really feel like she's made her point. But okay. The Count's player carelessly underestimated his opponent and took the first fall for his error. It woke him up considerably. The onlookers shouted raucous comments. He pinned her on the next fall. Kudelka counted a bit fast there, didn't he? Maybe. She pulls her punches a bit too, I noticed. She'll never make it to the next round if she keeps doing that in this company. So, the way that this goes initially is Drushnikovi pulling her punches, and then she goes up against, is it Borthari? Yeah. So Borthari gooses her, which it's not explained explicitly, but usually that means like a butt grab, right? But like a butt grab, like not like a cheek grab, like you're going underneath the butt, you know, sort of in the genital area, which is definitely designed to humiliate, right? Like, that's absolutely what's going on here. Especially once there are people catcalling, I feel like that's very much got to be what's happening here. And it throws her off, and she feels like clearly her face is red and she feels a way about this. And any woman knows this feeling of like suddenly being reduced by the way a man just treated you physically. It's such a gross feeling. It makes you feel like you want to shower, even though it's not your fault, but it feels like somehow, you know. And it's just, there's a scene, there's a book I read, and I wish I could remember the name of it, a while back. And it's sort of a It feel, that book. It's like a bunch of younger kids who are all friends with each other dealing with this like horror that visits their town. But they're in this in-between age, and they all play baseball together. And as they begin to age, there comes a day where they're playing baseball and there's only like one girl on this team, and the boys all decide to play shirts versus skins, but they clearly are choosing to play it that way because they're trying to get her to take her shirt off. And it's the first time that she has ever been like othered with these boys. And it is this mark of a real transition in their relationships with each other as friends, and her being like separated and targeted in this way. And she just winds up getting really upset and like leaving the game. And it was one of those scenes that's written so well where nobody's being overtly like harassing, but the subtext is so clear, and the kind of leering quality is there. And it just got to me because like we all have a moment in our lives like this where we realize what, like, oh, you're suggesting something that like I wasn't picking up at first, but ew, what the fuck, you know? And that realization being like embarrassing. And not to say that this is the first time that Drou has dealt with this at all, because I'm certain this is like the 60th time, but she's like on a stage in front of a bunch of people trying to sort of prove herself here. So it's extra, extra gross. And I love this. Vorkosigan motions Drou over and is like, yeah, we saw what he did. So they're trying to insult you, which means they're trying to insult my wife, which means that you are going to go in there and you are going to render that man unconscious. I don't care how. Take it as an order, and I don't mind if you break bones either. And she goes back into that ring and is just like, clearly like, oh, I've been let off the leash. Here we go. Guys. Drou returned to the ring with a slight smile on her face, eyes narrowed and glittering. She followed a feint with a lightning kick to her opponent's jaw, a punch to the belly, and a low body blow to his knees that brought him down with a boom on the matting. He did not get up. There was a slightly shocked silence. You're right. She was pulling her punches. Thought so. I love this so much. It's the best. Oh! Jen says, justice for Borthari. He didn't goose Drou. It was a random guy we'll never see again. Oh, you know what, though? Thank you, Jen. It really was important to me that it not be Borthari, but I've read this a couple times, and the way that it's, like, worded, it feels like Borthari, the next round featured Sergeant Borthari, who flattened his opponent twice. The defeated crawled out of the ring. Several more rounds went by, and it was Drou turn again. And it then says, this time with one of Ilian's men, but I was still having it in my head that it was Borthari, and that he had just like dominated so hard that he was in after several rounds. So appreciate that, Jen, because I didn't want it to be Borthari. So this, the whole way that this is going, eventually she does go up against Borthari, and Cordelia's like, she mentions the psychodynamics of this, which hadn't occurred to me, but yeah, that could be something to worry about. Vorkosigan's pretty solid on it being okay. Guys, this is so funny. The start was slow, Drou mainly concentrating on staying out of reach. Swinging around to watch, Lieutenant Koudelka accidentally pressed the release of his sword stick and the cover shot off into the bushes. I don't know, like, just, it's the fact that he's distracted, Borthari is distracted by him doing that cracks me up extra. Like, just, especially because Koudelka has been kind of a dick to her. And we deal with this later and find out some of what's happening there. But I really was like, he's already salty with her all the time. And the fact that he is the reason why Borthari lost here, which maybe that's putting it too bluntly, or it's not fully accurate, but I'm sure that's how he sees it. That is extra embarrassing. Cordelia, like, is saying to him, well, call the throw. And he says it wasn't a fair throw. It was my fault. Unfair distraction. You didn't call it unfair distraction a while ago, Cordelia objected. Let it go, Cordelia. But he's cheating her out of her point. And what a point. Borthari's been tops in every round to date. Yes. It took 6 months practice on the old General Warcraft before Koudelka ever threw him. Oh. Jealousy? Haven't you seen it? She has everything he lost. And then she says, well, she's obviously, and she gets cut off, but we find out later, she believes that Drou is in love with Koudelka, which I don't think the author intended us to figure that out. I think the author intended it to be like obvious to Cordelia because she has seen Drou in other circumstances. But if I'm wrong and we were supposed to have picked up on that, I didn't at all. So I just wanted to like put it out there that, you know, their interactions had caught my attention, but there was never a sense for me that she was like particularly into him. So I'm just trusting that there's a bunch of stuff that just hasn't been on the page. So eventually there's the, hey sir, why don't you come and fight? And Errol is just like, nah, nobody wants to see that. But it's so obvious that he really wants to do it. And finally, she kind of like, you know, gives him a little push because she can see that he wants to be persuaded. So he gets up and he gets his arm dislocated, long story short. And eventually he's like, well, we don't get into combat, like hand-to-hand situations often, but when we do, we win. And it's because of practice like this. But, ouch, that's brutal. Like, Borthari really, he holds his own. I'm not trying to act like he just got stomped or anything. But getting your arm dislocated, brutal, brutal, brutal. I hate it. So then comes the conversation about Drou and Kou. I can't with that, you guys. I really can't, but I guess I'm going to have to. Why doesn't he see it? What makes you think he doesn't? Asked Errol slowly. His behavior, of course. They'd make a pair. Don't you think she's attractive? Marvelously. But do you know about his injuries? Have you thought about that? And she's like, oh, no. Me? Do you know? And he says no. And she's like, can you ask him? And he's like, the fuck? No, I can't ask him. And she says, well, I've got to work with Drou. She's of no use to me if she pines away and dies of a broken heart. He's reduced her to tears more than once. She goes off where she thinks nobody's looking. Really? That's hard to imagine. You can hardly expect me to tell her he's not worth it, all things considered, but does he really dislike her? Or is it just self-defense? For what it's worth, my driver made a joke about her the other day, not even a very offensive one, and Kou got rather frosty with him. I don't think he dislikes her, but I do think he envies her. So I kind of like this as a wrench in the works because I just purely thought it was jealousy in the last section because he kind of bit her head off, you know, and I was just like, come on, man, like you're better than this. But finding out that perhaps he does have a thing for her as well, it is a very confusing, and this is something a lot of us sort of try to work out as we get older, is like, if you're into romantic relationships, sometimes you wind up going for people that aren't partners you want. It's that you want to be like that person. And so your instinct is to like get close to them romantically. And if you really begin to question yourself, you realize like, oh, actually, I just kind of want the life they have or want to do the things they do. And it's not actually about the person as much as this aspirational thing that you've got going on. And then we have this bit here where Cordelia is reflecting on how there isn't a way to like bring up his injuries because the attitude of everybody on Barrayar towards sex is just, it feels very puritanical, right? It's the usual, like, if you're a base-born woman, I'll make whatever jokes, but if you are an upper class woman, I won't in front of you. Some people, even in front of a baseborn woman, they're not going to do that. But with other guys, anything is on the table. But then there are certain acts that it's like, well, we don't talk about that. There are certain acts that you can make a joke about, but you never really like seriously talk about it. And it's just like all of these sort of, in her mind, arbitrary rules that she has tried to write down so that she stops like putting her foot in it, because she has a few times. And when she shows the list to Errol, he just cracks up at it. He's just like, this is how you see us. You know what? She found she could crack him up later with a properly timed mutter of Rule 9, sir. And I do really enjoy this as a little inside joke for the two of them. So, Cordelia had taken to regular sunset watching up on the roof. The view of the cityscape was very fine. Beyond I don't know how to say this, Borthari Castle? I hope I'm saying that right. None of it was like Beta Colony. Vorbar Sultana was all spread out on the surface, or climbed skyward, strangely two-dimensional and exposed. Beta Colony's cities plunged down into shafts and tunnels, many-layered and complex, cozy and safe. Indeed, Beta Colony did not have architecture so much as it had interior design. It was amazing the variety of schemes people came up with to vary dwellings that had outsides. And that was just such an interesting concept, like nothing having an outside that you could see and just all being interconnected that way. I kind of wish that we got to spend a little bit more time on Beta just to see this stuff. But there's also a moment where she's thinking about how air is just free here and you get as much as you want and there's no fees for it. And then she gets distracted because there's this boom and her guards jump. And they usher her inside. And one of them tries to say, I'm sure it was nothing. And she says it was a class 4 sonic grenade, probably air tube launched, unless the thrower was suicidal. Haven't you ever heard one go off? I can't get enough of her just putting people in their place when they try and act like she doesn't need to know shit. She's just like, okay, first of all, every time. And we find out that somebody took a pot shot at Vorkosigan's car. And he later is like, it worries me that he missed. Which is really like, what were they trying to miss? Was this purposeful? Is this like, and I'll tell you what, guys, it could be anybody. You know, that's the thing that she thinks on later is as one of the more disturbing aspects of this, that it's like kind of wide open who it could be. But what occurred to me is something that doesn't seem to enter her mind. And I don't think it should necessarily. I feel like if she isn't thinking it, then likely this isn't even like a possibility. But I'm going to mention it. Is there any remote outside chance that Baitons are trying to rescue her from her like brainwashing new husband, who is the regent king of Barrayar? Like, you know, she was seen by therapists. They saw that she was brainwashed in their mind. The next thing they know, she's almost drowned. Her therapist escaped. And now she's on Barrayar, married to a man who has been named regent. And I could really see that perhaps her people would think this was like a kidnapping, essentially. I don't really believe that's what's going on, but I can't help but wonder if it were my mom who thought this had happened to me and I just took off and ran away. I feel like she would be certain they needed to do something to get me back. I don't know what kind of influence her mother has, if they would, you know, invest any manpower into that. But it did enter my mind. So anyway, it turns out that Errol is okay. But both him and Kudelka their hearing has been affected temporarily. And so they're like shouting when they get back. And let's see. They talk about like who could have known their route because they vary it. But Vorkosigan's like, honestly, there's only so many ways to vary it. And they could have just been hiding out in random places for a week until we picked one that, you know, like just happened to go past them. And let's see. It was old ordnance. There could have been something wrong with its tracker. Nobody detected a laser rangefinder pulse. He paused, taking in Cordelia's white face. I'm sure it was a lone lunatic. How does a lone maniac get hold of military-grade weaponry? She inquired tartly. We will be investigating that. It was definitely old issue. Don't you destroy obsolete stockpiles? There's so much of it. Cordelia glared at this wit-scattered utterance. Wit-scattered utterance. Amazing. So then, you want me to give you a precise resonance reflection amplitude calculation for that sealed passenger cabin, Simon? Whoever chose that weapon was a competent military tech, if fortunately a poorish shot. My apologies, Captain Naismith. Ilian's tone grew more clipped. You are quite correct. His nod was a shade more respectful. Girl, this is what I need. This is what I need. Thank you. I love it so much. Oh, God. So they talk a little bit later about who it could have been, but honestly, I'm not going through all of that because there's just no inkling at this time. And then when we go to chapter 5, it's the Emperor's birthday party. Now, he gets given gold as like, oh, it's a present, but it's really them paying taxes, except they can't be seen to be paying taxes. Like this whole thing, it's so annoying. Like, we're doing the thing, but we can't call it what it is. So we're going to come up with this fucking backward ass way of doing it anyway, just under a different name. And we're all going to know what it is. We're just going to pretend it's not what it is. Like, stop. Oh my God. Just do what you have to do. Enough. So boring. I just have so little tolerance for like this sort of indirect, passive aggressive type, like, you know? Anyway, she comes down in her dress that she has been advised on by, let's see, who is it that helps her with this? Lady Vorpatrol, that's right. And when she appears, apparently, like a couple of the servants are just like, oh my God, that's so pretty. And she's like, okay, good. Yeah. People like it. She did a good job. Thank you. Her and her husband have to travel separately for safety, which I really related to her just being disappointed that they don't even get to spend that kind of time together in the car, because it's like a semi-private time where they can joke around. And there have been times where I'm going to an event with Owen and we have to take separate cars and meet there. And I'm always just kind of like, oh. So I really felt for her on that. And let's see. Oh, yeah, that's right. When he says, don't you know where the word count comes from? And she cites Earth, a pre-atomic late Roman term for a nobleman who ran a county. And he says here, it's a contraction of the term accountant. And at first she's like, oh, I didn't know that. And then she's like, wait, are you fucking with me? But he says that he isn't, and I believe him. I also appreciate that Earth is mentioned explicitly here. I think it has been before, but there was a point where I started to be like, wait, are we going to find out that like Barrayar is actually Earth? And, you know, that there's like one of those Planet of the Apes things being pulled here. But no, I'm glad it's not. So they go to the gates, and every other time she's been here, it's been some pretty serious situations. And so coming for a party, the whole vibe is just very, very different. It's not like the kinds of rowdy parties she has been to otherwise, but it's certainly different for the palace. And Cordelia is going through all of the crowds, trying to remember people's names. This is the sort of thing that, like, it's so odd, you guys. I really believe that I hate this sort of thing. And then I go out with Owen and see, like, his family, or we go, like, and I am the person remembering names, and I'm not even good with names, you know, but I feel like this obligation, and I automatically fall into these little small talk things, and, like, I dread it. I really dread it. But then once I'm in the midst of it, it's like automatic. And this is the sort of thing I feel like I would hate and dread, but then I would turn out to be, like, good at it. And it would be frustrating. Because this is, like, it's how it always went with me at different jobs I've had as well. I hate dealing with customers. I hate doing the public speaking thing and handling folks from outside the workplace. But I am very good at it, so that's always where I would wind up being placed. And it's funny because I didn't consider myself good at it for a long time until I began to see how bad at it some people are. And then I was like, really? You don't even know to, like, phrase it this way? Or, you know, it's just, I personally feel like this sounds like hell, but I also think that I would probably acquit myself pretty well. And just the idea of having to, like, there's different TV shows where people who are politicians have to remember folks' names and be like, oh, how's your mother Alice? You know, and they get briefed by their assistant who has, like, a whole folder full of photos, names of family members and pets, what your last conversation was. Like, they take intricate notes so that you're prepared when you speak to somebody. And I often think about how exhausting that has to be, like, not only gathering all that information, but then pretending that you just remembered it and not that the person next to you told you. And these people believe that you remembered, I think, you know, because, like, why wouldn't you? Anyway, it just fascinates me because it's like a combination of something that I have some skill in, but also kind of, like, despise the need for. And there's a moment here. Count Vidal Vodarian, he goes up to Corinne and, like, places his hand on her knee in this sort of familiar gesture. And she smiles at him, briefly puts her hand on his, but then when he walks away, her smile falls. And it could simply be he walked away and there's, you know, the smile's over. Or it could be that she's putting on a bit of a show. And we find out later on that she's, like, been trying to sort of distance herself from him on purpose. Because she encouraged his attentions, thinking that he might be able to protect her from her crazy-ass husband. And then it turns out that her father-in-law was able to do that effectively, and so she didn't need this guy. And now that her father-in-law is dead, he is trying to, like, really wriggle his way in there, and she realizes, I can't have that, because then he's going to try and go up against Vorkos again, and I am not interested in that sort of, like, headbutting thing. And fracturing of power. Which, it's really interesting to me that she is so focused on just raising her son and, like, living her life. And there doesn't seem to be any real ambition there, just wanting to be safe. And I really understand that. So, eventually, Vorpatrol, he's over here. That's right, I forgot about this. Lord and Lady Vorpatrol, were wearing these outfits that, like, his is almost more attention grabbing than hers, which is pretty rare apparently for Barrayaran men. She was wearing a carnelian dress with matching roses woven into her cloud of black hair, stunning against her velvety white skin. They made an archetypal Vor couple, sophisticated and serene, the effect only slightly spoiled by the gradual awareness from his disjointed conversation that Captain Vorpatrol was drunk. He was a cheerful drunk, though. His personality merely stretched a bit, not unpleasantly transformed. I like that of personality being stretched. I've also always liked the description when somebody gets drunk of them suddenly being expansive, because just like, you know, I really think that describes it well. So eventually she kind of pulls away from everything and winds up in a conversation with Borthari. And this dude is such a fuck. Like, it's really funny to me how long it takes her to understand what he just tried to do. She doesn't clock it right away. And I was like, instantly realize, oh, you really thought you were doing something here. So he at first compliments her dress. Are you enjoying the party? Are you going to have a boy or a girl? And he mentions how everybody had sort of thought the first they would try and go for would be a girl, because they would want to marry the prince, the emperor. Like, what do we call him now? But they would want to marry their child to him and secure their place in the hierarchy. And she's like, what? No. Oh my God. Errol didn't even want this position. Like, he wouldn't try and insert himself in and he's like, oh, come on now. And when she says this, she also is like, that's also extremely like long chances of them falling in love. And he genuinely is like, love? Oh God, that cracked me up. He's just like, what are you even bringing that up for? Like, she doesn't get, you know? And when she says he's way more practical than that, his response is, that's extremely interesting. Do you fancy he contemplates something more direct? Her mind was running tangential to this twisting conversation somehow. Beg pardon? He smiled and shrugged. That is him trying to get some information out of you, girl. He is like, he's not even being subtle about it. You know, like, she's just really not fucking grasping what's going on here at all. Again, she mentions like, well, you know, they took a shot at him the other day. Like, why would you want this job? It just makes you a target. And he's like, oh yeah, has anything come of the investigation? Which to me, immediately, I'm just like, oh, interesting that you want to know, and that you were like, oh, too bad, and drink your glass real quickly. It just feels a little bit like you're asking whether they've caught you. Like, maybe I'm just being paranoid, but it just felt for me very much like, yeah, he has something to do with this. And I love the fact that like everybody around her is drinking, and she's just like, ugh, if we had just used a fucking uterine replicator, I could have a drink right now, and I desperately want one. And that part of using a replicator hadn't occurred to me, but that does seem very convenient. So finally, we met once before the war briefly. Oh, I didn't know that. How little one truly knows of people. He paused, watching Errol, watching her watch Errol. One corner of his mouth crooked up, then the quirk vanished in a thoughtful pursing of his lips. He's bisexual, you know. He took a delicate sip of his wine. Yes, she agreed absently, looking fondly across the room. Now he's monogamous. You guys, this is different than it is in the audiobook. I just want to mention this. And it's funny that it's different because it's still not good, but the way it's phrased in the audiobook is even worse. So I'm just going to mention this. First of all, bisexual does not mean polyamorous, okay? So, like, can we just get that established and set aside this weird thing that we have had in our culture for so long, that if you're bisexual, it just means that you're like a general, like, equal opportunity slut? That is not what that means. Neither is being polyamorous either, but you know what I'm saying. In the audiobook, when he says he's bisexual, she says he was bisexual. Now he's monogamous, which is hilarious. Like the very idea oh, you're only bisexual if you're actually in a queer relationship, and if you're not, then that's just turned off, that's gone. That it just deactivates. It's like, you know what, like, it's so funny because, like, these books feel so modern, and him being bisexual and it not being an issue for her at all is a real modern feel as well. And then there's this conversation where I'm like, here it is. Here's the dated sort of feeling around everything. And the way it's described is just so, it just feels so off base. I get what she's trying for, and her intent is very good here, to have it just be a total non-issue to Cordelia. But the language used is just regrettable. So, when she says this, he chokes and is shocked that she already knows. And again, the way he says it, drops this, what he fancies as this little bomb, and then just takes a sip of his wine. I keep imagining, like, the kind of smug expression on his face, like Kermit having his tea. And he really, really expects this to fucking detonate, and then nothing happens because she knows already, which he never, ever saw coming. Which I enjoy, because it's not even that, like, her husband told her that himself. I don't know that they have had a real conversation about it. She knows about it because of Barrayar telling her. And he clearly was telling her in the hopes of fucking up her relationship with Errol also. And when she says, like, yeah, I know about that, and she's like, again, not seeing the expression on his face and the fact that he clearly had intended this to have an effect that it didn't have. He says, a Baton, I should have guessed. You are, after all, the people who bioengineered hermaphrodites. And then later on, he says something, and it's, I'm not sure, I'm trying to see if that's actually here. Because there's a sentence in the audiobook. Oh, yes. No, it is here. It's just further down than I expected. I didn't imagine I was marrying a 44-year-old virgin, Count Borthari. So it seems. You galactics are all degenerate. What perversions does he tolerate in return, I wonder? His eyes glinted in sudden open malice. So, calling her a degenerate just because she doesn't care that he's bisexual. So evidently, being gay is really, really frowned upon here. And I guessed that was likely to be the case, but this is like the confirmation that I really didn't want, to be honest. I didn't want to deal with this, but here it is. It's kind of funny, though, because even if it's frowned upon, it's clearly a sort of open secret. And everybody still seems to deeply respect him, so it hasn't seemed to, like, have any effect on his overall reputation. But yeah, this is when she finally clocks the fact that he was trying to do something to throw a wrench in the marriage, and it didn't work. And so she decides to go a little bit more on the offensive here. And he's like, do you know how his wife died? Really, again, thinking he's doing something. And she's like, yeah, suicide. Well, they thought maybe he killed her. Yeah, and he fucking didn't. Do you know why Barrayar died? He couldn't help it. He tilted toward her, drawn in. No. He tried to hurt Errol through me. I found that annoying. I wish you would cease trying to annoy me, Count Borthari, and I'm afraid you might succeed. You should fear it too. His initial patronizing tone had certainly given way to wariness. He made a smooth, open-handed gesture that seemed to symbolize a bow of farewell and backed away. Good. Bye. Ugh. Pitiful. Pitiful. What? This is somebody who really thinks he has any idea the nature of their relationship, and he just doesn't get it at all, or what is important to her. So anyway, this conversation just kind of, it's in her head, and she's just sort of thinking about the fact that, like, the way that she has been operating, she's going to need to, like, get it together a little bit more and stop relying so much on her husband to, like, direct her on who she should, like, become more friendly with and who she should share things with. And overall, her relationships, she needs to start, like, developing some of her own on her own without his input and needing him to be able to sort of, like, coach her all the time, which I really like that she's, like, coming to this realization, because yeah, that feels like she's just sort of exposed right now, you know, and there's almost a babe in the woods quality. And it's like, she's not naive. It's not that. It's that she is just so unfamiliar with the way Barrayarans operate in certain respects that she just walks into things without understanding all of the baggage that they have surrounding that topic or whatever. And so, yeah, you need to, like, start to really get a handle on this lady, because it's going to fuck you up at some point if you don't. So let's see, I'm trying to find, oh yeah, here it is. Cordelia found herself seated between Vortala and the speaker and carried on conversations with reasonable ease. So she's eating. There is talk about, like, culinary stuff, inventions, yada yada. I don't need to get into all of that. Gregor was peeled out of his little uniform and dove into pajamas, becoming boy and not icon once again. I really love that this kid is not a little monster, and that he is just a little boy who is bored and doesn't care about this. He's not a brat. He's not, like, fidgeting and being a shit, but it's just, you know, he's a child, and this is the most tedious. And so far, there is no indication that he is going to turn out to be a maniac. So she has this conversation with Kareen, and Kareen says drunken drolls are traditional. In fact, some less lethal mood-altering drugs are coming in the shuttleport cities. As usual, we seem to be adding to rather than replacing our own customs. Perhaps that's the best way. Is Count Vidal Vordarian one of those in the habit of getting publicly potted? No. Why do you ask? I had a peculiar conversation with him. I thought an overdose of ethanol might account for it. Do you know him well? How would you estimate him? Kareen said judiciously, he's rich, proud. He was loyal to Ezar during Serge's late machinations against his father, loyal to the Imperium, to the Vor class. There are 4 major manufacturing cities in Vordarian's district, plus military bases, supply depots. Vidal's is certainly the most economically important area on Barrayar today. The war barely touched the Vordarian's districts. It's one of the few the Citigandans, am I saying that right? Pulled out of by treaty. We sited our first space bases there because we took over facilities the Citigandans had built and abandoned. That's interesting, but I was wondering about the man personally, his likes and dislikes. Do you like him? At one time, I wondered if he might be powerful enough to protect me. And, you know, eventually she realized I've gone over this already. And then, do you personally like him? Oh, not now. And I love this. Do you have some claim to the Imperium in your own right or not? That would be for the military to decide. It's like a disease, isn't it? Too close. I'm touched, infected. Gregor is my hope of survival and my prison. Don't you want a life of your own? No, I just want to live. Does Vordarian see it that way? I mean, power isn't the only thing you have to offer. I think you underestimate your personal attractiveness. On Barrayar, power is the only thing. I admit, I did once ask Captain Negri to get me a report on Vidal. He uses his courtesans normally. You guys, it's just a real testament to like what she had to deal with her husband. That the bare minimum of like, he doesn't abuse women in bed is a step up. Oh, that is bleak. Anyway, Errol says when she comes back to the party, like, do you want to dance? And she says that she doesn't know how because they have these complicated dances that he does know and she's a little surprised by. So they go on a walk around the gardens and they come across Drou and Kou. And she is trying to teach him how to dance and he's getting very frustrated because it's not going well. Instantly tries to be like, it's no use. And she's like, come on. You had to like practice all kinds of other physical therapy more than once for it to work. So I'm not going to let you give up. I'm tired. So switch to kissing, Cordelia urged silently. I love it. She's literally in the bushes watching them, doing the like shipping, like, now kiss. Oh, amazing. It's so fun. So eventually there's like somebody who walks around and kind of interrupts the two of them because he throws up, and it's so funny. He leans over the balustrade, throws up, and then there's like people underneath who apparently got hit by it. Oh my God. Can you imagine, you guys? It's so gross. Good party, Kou? What? Oh, yes. Astonishing. When I joined the service, I never dreamed I'd end up here. Time was, I never thought I'd end up anywhere. I sure wish women came with an operating manual. I could say the same for men. But you and Admiral Vorkosigan, you're different. Not really. We learned from experience, maybe. A lot of people fail, too. Do you think I have a chance at a normal life? You make your own chances, Kou, and your own dances. You sound just like the Admiral. I do really like that. I have this sometimes with Owen where, like, we'll both respond in almost identical ways to certain questions and stuff, and it just makes me go, yeah, see, this is why we're together, because we just see things the same way a lot of the time. And so when she talks to her husband later, she's like, I think you need to move Borthari into your short list. And she says he seems to have an assassin's mind, the sort that fires from cover into the back of his enemy. And he's like, I don't feel like that's true. That's not who I've gotten to know. And she's sort of wondering, like, is he normally bullheaded and he has just been pushed so far that now he has gotten subtle? Or is he always been subtle and nobody has realized it, you know? But yeah, she says, move him to your short list. And he just says, okay. Like, he listens to her. Love this for him. Listen to your wife. She knows some things, okay? All right. So then we go to chapter 6. I'm just like running out of time so quickly, but this conversation with Borthari is what I'm going to sort of jump to here. He has been watching her really closely, and there is a point, I can't remember who it is that tells her, but that he isn't sleeping well and that he like keeps being sick and not showing up to things. And oh, that's right. Because there's the thing with his little girl. Your little girl's been very good this morning, Mistress Hyssopy assured the sergeant. Took her bottle right down. She's just had her bath. She guided the way up the narrow stairs. One bedroom was clearly her own. The other, with a bright window looking down over rooftops to the lake, had recently been made over into a nursery. Say hi to your daddy. Her head has grown a lot. They usually do between 3 and 4 months. I don't know why, but him just saying her head has grown a lot is so funny. Like, it's just like, it's just such an unflattering observation. And that's like him, right? He's just extremely practical and direct. So they're watching the baby. Of course, Cordelia is thinking about how, eventually she's going to have one. It's going to be a boy. I think I mentioned this already, but I had asked last episode if we knew, and we do, evidently, already. Even though she is less than, 3 months, I think? I don't remember, but I know that she is only just barely starting to show. So it's early enough that I don't think with our current tech we would be able to tell the gender. I guess I should say sex. And I may be wrong about that, though. I don't, have a lot of experience with this sort of thing. So, and I love that Dr. Henry is just like, it's wild that she came out of a replicator. She seems totally normal. And Cordelia is like, I came out of a replicator. And he just gives her a full-on once-over and is like, and you don't have defects? And she says certified, which I am assuming that's very literal, like certified without defects. But it's such a weird way to say it that is so problematic in so many ways based on our current culture that it felt really weird. But yeah, he's very much like, we need this technology. We need to figure out how to make these. And I kind of like the fact that he is so open to this concept, because I could see people of Barrayar being really puritanical about this as well. And even with doctors being like, this is great tech that we need, I'm sure that kind of hang up will take some time, that people will have it, and it might take some time to overcome. So let's see. Oh, right. There's a discussion about some of the men and where they live, and, people being in the city or preferring to live outside of it. And then the talk about Borthari and where the baby came from. And she tells the story that he invented. Overall, this whole thing, it's when eventually, she tells her about him being in bed. He mutters to himself. He's sick so much, days in a row where he won't get out of bed, but he doesn't have a fever or anything. And she says, are you afraid of him? And Cordelia's like, I'm super not afraid of him. And you shouldn't be either. It's a profound insult. And just sort of explains a little bit. And Drou is like, okay, sorry, I'm not going to bring it up. So she goes over to Piotr's house. Again, he's delighted to have her because she is pregnant, and evidently this makes her otherworldly for him. He tells her, don't you want to redecorate the house? And she's like, this isn't our house. You live here. It's not even really Errol's house. And he's like, no, this is what you do, though. It's clearly part of the tradition. So she's like, well, there are 8 floors. It would be great if there was a lift tube. And I love how his instinct is to be like, a lift tube. And then he catches himself because he just told her that it was okay for her to make changes. So he is, Piotr, he's definitely old fashioned, but he has some sense to him at the very least. And agrees. He's like, well, where would we even put it in? And she says, next to the plumbing would not mess with anything. And he's like, all right, cool. Find a builder and we will do it. So there's something very endearing about that little scene to me. I just love this. So Cordelia watched them away, then turned her face back to catch Borthari watching her again. And she makes sure that he stays with her and doesn't go on with the rest of them because he has been acting really weird. And it turns out that he's been wanting to speak to her very badly. And he explains that the way things have been done to him with this memory therapy is that anytime he thinks about Escobar, it causes this horrific migraine. And so when he begins to think about or remember anything, he winds up laid up in bed because the pain is so intense, which is so awful. Oh my God, suppression therapy. We just called it hell. Every day we went to hell till we didn't want to go there anymore. oh my God, this is so awful. And he says, sometimes I even dream. And if I wake up too slowly, I remember the dream, and all I can do is roll over and cry until I can think about something else. Oh, you guys, this is so heartbreaking. Count Piotr's other armsmen, they think I'm crazy. They think I'm stupid. They don't know what I'm doing here with them. I don't know what I'm doing in here with them. To be a Count's sworn armsman, it's an honor. Only 20 places to fill. They take the best. They take the bloody heroes, the men with medals. If what I did was so bad, why did the Admiral make Count Piotr make a place for me? And if I was such a hero, why did they take away my memory of it? And she's very cautious throughout this conversation to ask him how much pain he's experiencing, because she's trying to keep it from being too terrible, but also it's his choice how much he wants to endure, you know? And it turns out one of the main things that he has been extremely worried about is whether or not he raped her. And she is so horrified that he has been wondering that for literally months. And I just, this poor dude, I don't know how he's getting through the day. You know, this is just so much to live with. And he has one memory. Admiral Barrayar, Lord Vorkosigan, and Admiral Rolf Vorhalis. I was there, except I didn't have any clothes on. Admiral Barrayar said something very insulting to Lord Vorkosigan. He had Lord Vorkosigan backed up against the wall. Prince Serge laughed. Then Barrayar kissed him full on the mouth, and Vorhalis tried to knock Barrayar's head off, but Lord Vorkosigan wouldn't let him. I am so curious what the hell was going on here. There's just very, very... She's I think that's probably a real memory, because I know some janky shit was happening, but I can't tell you specifically what was going on there. And then he says, and Elena, I remember, and then he starts to say, she was my wife, and then he stops and he says, she wasn't my wife, was she? No, but you know that. But I remember believing she was. And she explains all of that, and then she says taking away her contraceptive implant and allowing or compelling you to impregnate her was part of their idea of sadism. You guys, it didn't occur to me that she had contraception that they had to remove, and that is so extra horrible. It's already horrible enough to get pregnant from rape, but to find out that somebody explicitly wanted to impregnate you, to continue to torment you, is so beyond anything that I had even considered. It's grotesque. Oh my God, it's fucking horrible. And he describes about how some of the memories, when it starts to get really bad with the pain, red rings develop around things. And at this point, he describes her as looking sort of pink, Cordelia. And let's see. Barrayar ordered you to rape me, but you refused out of your own will without hope of rescue or reward. She doesn't tell him about him killing Barrayar. That's, she thinks, going to be too much for him to fully delve into the memory that they were really trying most to suppress, which I think is probably a good idea. But this whole conversation and how much trust he has to have in her to ask her this, there is just something so heartwarming is a weird word to use, because normally that's used for things that are really wholesome, and this is so not. But you know what I'm saying? Just him feeling like there is somebody he can ask. I am so glad she's here for him. You know what I'm saying? And he says, I'm not less a rapist just because you were not my victim. And she says, that is correct. And then he says, do you know what's better than sex? Killing. It feels even better afterwards. It shouldn't be such a pleasure. Lord Vorkosigan doesn't kill like that. It's a release of rage, I'd guess. How did you get so much rage balled up inside you? The density is palpable. People can sense it. It goes back a long way, but I don't feel angry most of the time. It snaps out suddenly. Even Borthari fears Borthari, she murmured in wonder. Yet you don't. You're even less afraid of me than Lord Vorkosigan. I see you as bound up with him somehow, and he's my own heart. How can I fear my own heart? Milady, a bargain. You tell me when it's all right to kill, and then I'll know. And I love her because this is a sort of thing that I feel like another writer would have her be like, I don't like it, but okay. And her, she's like, no. Like, there are going to be times where I'm not there. There are going to be times where it's self-defense and you have to be able to tell if you're being attacked. Like, you are going to need to begin to trust yourself. And then she sat up, eyes widening in sudden insight. That's why your uniform is so important to you, isn't it? It tells you when it's all right, when you can't tell yourself. All those rigid routines you keep to, they're to tell you you're all right, on track. And this is just, it just reminded me so much of my father. My father was involved in some real awful shit when he was younger, living in Colombia as a part of the guerrillas, and then later becoming a coke dealer. And he saw some truly horrific things, and he did some truly horrific things, I have no doubt. And I really believe it's a major part of what caused him to become such a fundamentalist when he became born again. Because having things to tell you how to be is so comforting when you have something in you that you feel like is right on the edge of like spinning wildly out of control. And I have no doubt if he had like been able to join the military here in the US, if he had been young enough and had been a citizen and everything, that he would have like joined up again, because he needed that rigidity, you know? So yeah, this whole thing just, it just made me think of him so much. And she's like, I can't be your conscience. You have to make the right choices, but I can't remember them, how I did it. Whatever you think I can do for you, you've got a blood right to it. We owe you, Errol and I. We remember why, even if you can't. Remember it for me then, milady, and I'll be all right. And it ends with her just saying, believe it. You guys, this is so sad. Borthari, you poor man. What a mess. Vicky says real or not real, a la Hunger Games. Totally. I didn't even think of that, but definitely it's like the exact same thing, basically. All right, guys, I've got to wrap this up, but these were really, really good chapters. So curious where we're going with this. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.